Let's get into this a little bit. As you can tell, Neeshan Balton, who is representing the Johannesburg Crisis Alliance, criticised government's slow reaction to address the challenges plaguing the city. Joins me live now, is also from the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation. Neeshan, thank you so much for the time. Appreciate it. Better late than never, I guess, right?
Always. We will never give up hope that we can make a contribution to getting this city working.
What did you make of the president's address?
I thought it was spot on. His understanding of the issues reflected a fair degree of depth. And keep in mind that the president was part of the process of establishing this metropolitan chamber in the early 1990s. So it's not one who's familiar with the battles that go into trying to get a city to function for everybody. I think he was spot on in terms of the issues that were concluded. Governance, financial sustainability, electricity, water are really amongst the critical issues of the city, which need to be addressed in the short term, and I suppose long term would be stuff that comes after the 2026 elections.
Is this all for show, though? Because now you all of a sudden have the G20 in town and you feel like, well, we have so many things that aren't actually working. I mean, the mayor himself, Tata Moreo, was speaking about how we're going to fix the routes that the G20 members are actually ultimately going to be driving on, and we're going to fix those. So is this feeling like a little bit more for show and that it's not really genuine?
I hope it isn't. I really want to take the president, the mayor, and the premier on their word that it isn't. And we certainly, from our side, even if it is due to the G20, the immediate fix-ups that we have seen needs to be welcomed. And what they indicate is that the city, if it wanted to, could have done these things, could have marshaled the resources to do it. And we now have the proof that these things can be done. And if we have to thank the G20, we will do that. But we now know that the city has the capacity to fix up the things that needs to be fixed up and to do it urgently. So I don't want to dwell on whether this is a show or not, but rather that it does indicate that things can be done. And with the intervention of the president, they need to be sustained beyond the G20.
They certainly do. My question mark to all of this, I suppose, is that we spent in excess of $3 billion in order to fix the country for the 2010 World Cup. That's around 50 billion rand, give or take. Since then, we've spent more than 50 billion on South Africa's infrastructure. And yet, we still don't look anything near what we looked like in 2010, especially in Gauteng. Where did we go wrong?
Well, I think fundamentally, because you're looking at expenditure incurred. So a city like Joburg can say that they've spent 2 billion on X project. But when you go and actually investigate what has been delivered for that 2 billion, the likelihood is that the actual cost was perhaps half of that. And just take the Lillian and Goy Road, for example. Money was spent on a contractor, from what we are led to believe, and that contractor absconded without doing any work. Now, when you read the final report, you will see that the money was spent. But whether the money was spent actually delivered something at the end of the day is what you don't get to read about. And that's where the gap is. And that's a gap that we, in our submission to the president, we are saying that there needs to be a complete financial and organizational review of the city, precisely to deal with that gap that you have just highlighted now.
Can you even revive it, though? And one looks at the inner city of Johannesburg, for example, particularly where, the city's chambers are, where the ANC's headquarters are. Then you move on to areas like Maboneng as well, and the inner city near Braamfontein. Can that even be revived, considering that there was a time where that looked like it was happening? We even had the whole Mandela Bridge revival that happened at some point in time. Can we actually revive the inner city, or is it just becoming too difficult to do now?
No, I think it can be done. And we've shown in the earlier parts of democratic local government that it could be done. The whole bridge that you refer to is an example of an initiative that came about when the city was really in a far worse state than it is now. When you have effective leadership, when you have political will, when you have competent people running the city administratively, and when its key agencies are headed up by people who have integrity and competence, then I think anything is possible in the city. Look at the era when Mayor Masondo was in charge. You had decisive leadership, you had ethical leadership, you had competent management, and then the city was turned around. When all of those key criteria for effective urban governance was weakened and in fact disappeared, the kind of deterioration that we all see now started to seep in and almost seem inevitable. Many other cities in the world, New York at some point was in a similar state as Johannesburg, but it got turned around. And I think there are many other cities in the world who have gone through this. But the key ingredients is leadership, is competent people, and is effective usage of resources, both financial and human, to address the critical issues. But fundamentally, it's about getting the citizens of the city involved in a very meaningful way, so that we don't stand and look at somebody walking with a traffic light and just assume that it is normal. And that's what you've seen in Joburg. You see people just stripping down infrastructure, and there's no sense of ownership over that infrastructure by the residents of the city, because the political gap, the gap between the politicians and the residents is so vast. And I think once that is in fact reduced, so that people take ownership of the city, ownership over their own particular areas in meaningful ways, then I think this thing can be turned around.
Is it about breaking down infrastructure and then rebuilding, or just fixing what we currently have? Because one wonders, we've seen all the fires that have happened in a lot of the inner city buildings. You have, for example, the most iconic of buildings being Ponte, now up for sale again, ultimately, even though there was a massive revamp of that also. How exactly do we get this right? What are the solutions here?
Well, I think when you started off, I think there is some in some parts of the city or infrastructure that can be repaired. If you take the Johannesburg Library, that library is soon to be opened after some degree of pressure, because it's found that it can be repaired. Then there perhaps are other parts of the cities that are beyond repair, and that's where you need competent people to come in to make that kind of assessment. I think Ponte, from what I've read and have seen, is the fact that it is going up for resale. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, nobody would have wanted to buy it. Today, there's most likely to be a number of interested buyers, because there's been some work by particularly the private sector and others in terms of renovating Ponte and to make it something that anybody else with greater resources might want to invest in. And that's the critical part, is the partnerships that the city needs for effective infrastructure management and redevelopment. I certainly don't think that there's no problem that cannot be addressed in the city of Johannesburg. Johannesburg, as the president said, is far too important and too big to fail. If it fails, it has national and perhaps continental consequences.
The president said that you, amongst many others, yourselves as the Johannesburg Crisis Alliance, the Joburg Crisis Alliance, would be invited to participate in that working group. What exactly would you want from the terms of reference in order to indeed be keen to join and hopefully try to revive the city?
So that's something we're really trying to grapple with ourselves now. The announcement caught us off guard. We will be talking to people who in eThekwini who are either part of this or who are observing it as civil society to understand how this is being rolled out there and what would make for effective participation. I think in general, what we would not want to do is to go in there and find that all we are meant to do is to rubber stamp decisions that have already been made, because that's something we certainly would not want to be part of. I think secondly, we recognize that only a few people might be able to participate in these working groups, but their relationships with wider society would require that they are able to communicate, they are able to consult, and they're able to give feedback from those consultations to those who are in those working groups. I think that those channels are going to be critical for wider society to be able to participate meaningfully in this process of transition and transformation. And if the terms of reference are so constrained that they don't allow for that kind of effective participation, then I do not think that we would take up an offer to participate, and I assume many others wouldn't as well.
Come on, Neeshan, you've got a favorite spot in Joburg. What's that? What would you revive first?
There's a wonderful wetlands around Lenasia that plays such a critical part in the ecosystems of that entire region flowing into the Vaal.
Yeah.
If that could be restored and cleaned, it would really be an important personal area of interest to me.